A high-level US delegation has arrived in India to negotiate trade and investment. The deadline for America's tariffs is April 2. From that date, the US will impose reciprocal tariffs on various countries. Reciprocal tariffs mean that whatever tariffs other countries impose on America, those countries will face the same tariffs in return, a tit-for-tat approach. The US is doing this to extract concessions from other countries by applying pressure. Now you might understand why the US suddenly announced tariffs on countries buying oil from Venezuela. We'll discuss this in this video. This is Trump's strategy, building pressure on other countries to secure a more favorable deal for the US. It is his negotiation tactic. Now bilateral talks will take place between the US delegation and India. In these discussions occurring before the April 2 deadline, the US will attempt to persuade India to reduce tariffs on American goods. Meanwhile, India will try to reach a trade deal by offering some concessions to the US, aiming to avoid the reciprocal tariffs set to take effect on April 2. India wouldn't want to strain its economic ties with the US. This will be the fundamental approach of both countries during the talks.
Trump has benefited from his strategy. Even before the bilateral talks, India had reduced some tariffs on US goods, effectively signaling that it was preparing the ground for productive negotiations and was open to addressing US trade concerns. Seeing this, Trump perceived his negotiation tactics as effective. Therefore, with the intention of securing a better deal, the US decided to increase pressure on India before the talks. Initially, Trump warned that reciprocal tariffs would be imposed on India starting April 2. He repeatedly criticized India publicly, stating that it imposes excessive tariffs on US goods, referring to India as a tariff king. This pressure tactic appeared to be working as India showed willingness to reduce tariffs on US goods. So to escalate the pressure further, just before the US delegation's visit to India, Trump announced that secondary tariffs would also be imposed on countries purchasing oil from Venezuela. This meant an additional 25% tariff on top of existing ones. Trump justified his decision by stating, "We are doing this because Venezuela is a very hostile country to the US."
By the way, this is when the US itself imported a significant amount of Venezuelan oil last year. But this has always been the case. The US is known for its double standards and selective implementation of its policies. There is nothing new in this. The US conveniently changes its policies whenever it wants, according to its strategic interests. Right now, the US is targeting Venezuelan oil. Countries like China, India, Spain, and Italy are the primary importers of Venezuelan crude oil, so they will be impacted by Trump's 25% additional tariffs on Venezuelan oil. Trump now wants to put pressure on the Venezuelan government because we know how serious he is about the problem of illegal immigration. You must have seen videos of mass deportations. Due to the Venezuelan economic crisis, millions of people are fleeing the country, and many of them are coming to the United States. Trump does not like this at all. He considers illegal immigration a national security threat. So he wants to reduce the engagement of countries with Venezuela through tariff threats. This will further harm the Venezuelan economy, and if the pressure builds up, it will become easier to get Venezuela to agree to demands. This is one. Then efforts will also be made to extract trade-related concessions from other countries by threatening to impose tariffs on them for importing Venezuelan oil. So here we are seeing an attempt to kill two birds with one stone: Venezuela and countries engaging in trade with Venezuela.
Trump knows that oil exports are the lifeline of Venezuela's economy. By targeting them, Venezuela's economy can be weakened. The influence of countries like China, Russia, and Iran in Venezuela can also be countered. These developing alliances can be undermined. By discouraging international trade with Venezuela, support for the Maduro government can be reduced. Later, access to Venezuela's resources can be secured through pressure. If they do not comply, a regime change operation can be carried out. This is why the US is pressuring the Venezuelan government through economic and diplomatic coercion. The US rejects the Maduro administration, which won the 2024 Venezuelan elections, and instead supports opposition leader Edmundo Gonzalez. From this, you can understand Trump's confrontational approach toward Venezuela. The whole game is to make Venezuela comply with US policy. This is the intention behind recent punitive measures serving US interests and regional ambitions. America first.
This was about America. Now, what is India doing about it? We know that India is dependent on other countries for oil imports. It is currently the third largest consumer of crude oil in the world, importing more than 85% of its crude oil. And this consumption is increasing, and so is the demand for crude oil in India. If the supply of crude oil is constrained, prices in the global market will rise. As a result, India's imports will become more expensive. In value terms, what is India's biggest import item? Crude oil. So any disruption in the supply chain will significantly impact India. Therefore, due to increasing geopolitical uncertainties, India is focusing on diversifying its oil imports and strengthening its integration into global supply chains. Secondly, we see that India and China are trying to mend ties. Relations between the two countries deteriorated significantly after the 2020 Galwan clash. In response to Chinese aggression, India had imposed restrictions on China's trade and investments. Now, if the US pressures both India and China, they may consider increasing engagement with each other.
Given the unpredictability of the US, both Asian countries can mend their ties to mitigate potential risks. In the future, we may see India lifting tariff restrictions on trade and investments with China. China also wants India to reduce the tariff and non-tariff barriers imposed on its goods. Amid global uncertainty, India is exploring new options, which may include easing some restrictions on China. Under the Trump administration, the US is following a transactional approach with countries and adopting a protectionist stance, causing tension in its relations with other nations. You must be aware of the rift developing between the US and Europe. Due to this shift in US policy, countries have begun reconsidering their economic and geopolitical strategies. Therefore, under US pressure, India and China may move toward reducing their bilateral tensions and exploring opportunities for increased cooperation. We are already seeing both countries discussing a return to pre-2020 conditions. Talks of dragon-elephant cooperation have resurfaced. Thus, India and China could improve their relations in the future to address trade vulnerabilities. When interests converge, major rivalries can quickly turn into cooperation. Just look at what is happening between the US and Russia right now. It is only a matter of time and a matter of interests.
Under the America First trade policy, Trump's focus is on negotiating trade terms that favor US interests. His shift toward protectionism and tariff threats is part of this strategy. Through this approach, he aims to reshape international trade relationships in a way that benefits the US economy. Trump prioritizes America's economic interests over multilateral cooperation. For this reason, he is altering America's traditional policy of promoting free trade and open markets. This is seen as the US retreating from globalization. The US is taking this approach because it has lower trade dependency compared to other countries. If we add a country's total exports and imports, we get its total trade volume. In the case of the US, the sum of total exports and imports is approximately 25% of its GDP, which is very low compared to countries like China and Canada. Due to the low share of trade in its economy, the US has the leverage to adopt protectionist policies.
The more a country depends on trade, the more tariffs can hurt it. Conversely, the less a country relies on trade, the less impact it experiences from tariffs and global market fluctuations. Therefore, having relatively lower dependence on trade is a strategic advantage for the US. Because of this, America can adopt protectionist policies with fewer losses compared to other countries. This is why Trump is using tariffs as a tool to exert pressure on economies that are more dependent on trade. However, America's approach criticizing global bodies, focusing on control instead of cooperation, prioritizing domestic manufacturing, and adopting protectionist policies may offer some short-term advantages but could lead to economic and diplomatic challenges in the long run. The US may experience slower growth, high inflation, and strained international relations. As a consequence, other countries may start seeking alternatives to the US dollar, potentially accelerating the trend of de-dollarization. In this video, we discussed Trump's negotiation tactics, examined Trump's protectionist stance, and explored the latest tariffs on Venezuelan oil. I hope you found this video useful. Thank you for your time.